There was no coincidence to this eclipse. When I first heard about it, it blew my mind. The idea of the midday sun blotted out by darkness at noon, in a line extending coast to coast from Oregon to South Carolina, passing through 13 states, excited my lizard man brain. When I found out the center line of totality would cast a shadow over where my brother Mark was buried, there was no doubt. I would be there. The Bible says, at the end of every 7 years, thou shalt make a release. Deuteronomy 15:1. This is not bad advice. I left the Army in 2010. It was 7 years, time to move on, or the war and the death and the waste would cast a permanent shadow, not just on my life, but the lives of all those in my orbit. For the past 2 years, I had been working on a book about Bo Bergdahl. The case and the court-martial stretched on, while living like a monk in Arkansas in between trips to Fort Bragg, Tampa, and Washington, D.C. It was unsustainable. I needed something to shake me from my stupor. I hoped the voyage to the eclipse and observation of it would change something. I didn't know what. I joked it was the apocalypse on a schedule, straight out of the book of Revelation. The fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not. Revelation 8:12. Some part of me hoped it was. If that was the case, I would be ready. I met Doug Laux last year in an Irish bar in Washington, D.C. He'd just released a book about his 7 years as a CIA case officer. I wanted to ask him about Afghanistan. If anyone knew the feeling of abandonment, it was Doug. In the CIA, he'd lived a double life, lying to everyone but his brother about what he did for a living. He'd left the agency and written a book that angered his colleagues. Doug was on board and suggested we make a pilgrimage with the Great American Eclipse. We'd rent an RV, deck it out with camera gear, and roll out, pioneer style, cameras rolling. A plan came together, set out chasing the sun west from Texas along the Butterfield and Oregon trails to Idaho. If society didn't collapse, we'd film and write about the whole thing as creatures of the road, and hopefully get some perspective in Jubilee. If society did collapse, we'd have a mobile command center. We were bedded down in an Amarillo, Texas Walmart parking lot, windows of the RV propped open for some air, and I found myself circling back to the idea of abandonment. I couldn't sleep. Somewhere within earshot, a couple was fighting in the parking lot. Their fight was a low murmur punctuated by bursts of audible dialogue accompanied by the slamming of a car door. "I need you and I want you, but I don't have to fucking be with you," the woman screamed at her boyfriend. My brother was passed out in the bulkhead seat, snoring softly. Doug was in the middle, tucked into a bed. I sat up into the lotus position on a camouflage army poncho liner, called a whoopee, laid over the rubberized mattress in the back of the RV. Through a sliver in the curtains, I could see the boyfriend limping spastically towards the entrance of the 24-hour Walmart. The woman stayed in the passenger seat, the light from the orange ember of her cigarette glowing brighter as she breathed. I fell asleep. At 7:11 in the morning, my phone vibrated. Doug. He's an early riser, up before the sun most days. Apparently you guys didn't realize my relationship with Walmart. It's just impulse buy after impulse buy. The door to the RV opened and Doug unloaded the bounty. The orange machete seemed to touch over the top, but I saw the logic. Always better to be prepared.
But it's just one impulse buy after another, man.
We stopped at Cadillac Ranch, a 1974 modern art installation by the Ant Farm Artist Collective. Doug wanted to test the drone he had brought to film the eclipse. As a former CIA officer, he didn't mind making people uncomfortable by filming them from the air. There was a remarkably international vibe to the crowd at Cadillac. As my brother spray-painted the lead Cadillac with a sunburst for the eclipse, a Spaniard in a t-shirt with a skull and crossbones design cocked his finger at the drone filming him and mocked shooting it down. We hit traffic in Denver at 5 p.m. that Friday. The odometer clicked over to 666.6 immediately after the exit to Yale Road, and crazy Illuminati world-ending thoughts kept percolating up from my brain faster than my rational brain could swat them down. That night, we settled into another Walmart parking lot in Rawlins, Wyoming. Doug's drone didn't work there. It was the site of Wyoming's only prison. So what happened?
I tried lifting it off and it just says NFZ. And I was like, I don't even know what the fuck this is. So I kept pushing it. And usually I can just deny it. I can just exit out and do it anyway. So like if I was in Manhattan,
You know what it is?
I can just exit out and fly. What?
You know where the only prison in Wyoming is?
Is it nearby?
This town.
Okay.
Yeah.
That has to be what it is then.
I think so. It looks great. Are you excited for the eclipse?
I'm kind of excited for
The waitress at the Wrangler Cafe in Pinedale, Wyoming, was hearing strange things. The local sheriff had gotten some calls about the legality of animal sacrifice in the shadow of the moon. As long as the animals weren't tortured, there was nothing illegal about it, but the waitress still found it strange.
I mean, you're assuming the world's not going to end, right?
I was more concerned with the people that were calling in and wondering if it was against the law to do animal sacrifices.
Really? Around here?
Yeah, and oddly enough, it's not. I assumed it would be, but it's a religious thing, and as long as they don't torture them, they can do it.
She passed along a rumor that they brought in thousands of body bags in the event of a mass suicide. The toilets were backed up in Jackson, Wyoming. The whole town smells like sewage, she said, and I wondered what it smelled like at Dick Cheney's. He lived there on a golf course. I wondered if he'd find any meaning in the daytime darkness, or if it would just seem normal.
Well, and this is probably a rumor, but I heard they ordered thousands of body bags because supposedly it's supposed to be a big deal if you commit suicide
Really?
during the total eclipse. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, did you see the thing on Craigslist? The guy that was offering, saying that he wanted to impregnate a woman during the eclipse while it's black.
Right.
Like, during totality.
Right.
He wanted to, he was looking for a woman that was willing to kind of participate.
Well, he probably has that up all year round.
He has it the next day for sunrise tomorrow.
Yeah.
Famous sunrise.
And that's right. Sunset. Oh my goodness.
What was your name?
Isn't that crazy? Kim.
Cam, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you guys too.
That night, we all went out to Dolly's Subway Club, a local bar in Rigby that the Mormon members of my family avoided. We'd gone there the night before to check the town's pulse and see what they thought of the eclipse, and figured we'd take the out-of-towners out for one last party before the apocalypse, if it came. The night before, we had noticed that the local barflies were friendly in the way that people in the Intermountain West are friendly. They say they're happy to have you there and then leave you alone until you leave. I'd introduced myself and asked the guy sitting at the bar what he thought of the eclipse. Shaking his hand, I noticed he didn't have a thumb, and then learned his friends called him Boots because he only wore boots and shorts. Boots seemed amped up on something and unconcerned with the eclipse. He was more confused why we would want to watch it in Rigby. I didn't explain. We told him we'd be back on Eclipse Eve and wondered if we'd see him there. He told us probably not. He reckoned he'd be passed out in a ditch the next day. He kept his word. The next day we didn't see Boots when we walked back in with 3 carloads of people. We stayed all night, playing pool and talking and singing karaoke. I sang Toto's Africa, which was a post-war anthem in New York City bars for me and my buddy Tony after we came back from Afghanistan. Walter sang Suspicious Minds, and then Amanda and Lisa did a duet to Total Eclipse of the Heart, of course.
Nothing I can do, total eclipse of the heart.
The morning of the eclipse, the house was abuzz with activity. Walter woke up early and brought back a sugary breakfast for everybody. Doug sat and double-checked his camera positions, telling anyone who asked that he was a photographer. He didn't want or need anyone asking him about his time in the CIA. In CIA, Doug was an operations officer, undercover to everyone but his co-workers and his brother. CIA limited the best assignments to those with the strongest cover. The less people Doug told about who he really was or what he did for a living, the more chance there was to do important work. So he didn't tell anyone. Not his mom, not his dad, not his girlfriends or friends. There was a resonance to the timing of the eclipse for him, too. The window for totality, when the moon would fully cover the sun and the earth below would fall into darkness, was 2 minutes. He'd learned in CIA and passed on to his students the importance of making a meeting with a clandestine agent, being on the X, within the 2-minute window. These meetings were planned down to the second, with both the agent and the CIA officer spending hours on a surveillance detection run before the meet to ensure that they were unobserved, in the black in agency parlance. The eclipse and our journey to it was a 2-minute window on a cosmic scale. Today we were on the X in Rigby, Idaho. Through the eclipse glasses, the moon took a bite from the sun, a half-moon cutout between the 1 and 3 on the sun's clock face. My niece said it looked like the Apple logo and went back to playing with her cousins. My Aunt Lisa, who'd come into town from Burley, Idaho, suggested that we all write out manifestations for the eclipse. Things we wanted, things we hoped for, things we might achieve in unison with the cosmic event. At any other time, it might have felt like some hippie bullshit, but I was into it. I wrote out mine and Doug wrote out his. Stephanie, a West Point graduate and former Army officer who was trying to figure out next steps and came to watch the eclipse with us, wrote out hers, and we all passed them around for the others to read. The moon pulled in front of the sun. On the north side of the backyard, near the fire pit, to the left from the porch, the women who had pitched tents and read tarot cards the night before howled at the moon. Doug, my nephew Ethan, and I stood in the middle, and my Mormon relatives stood and sat in lawn chairs near the trampoline on the right side of the lawn. It was chilly in the sudden darkness. At the first moment of totality, there was a collective gasp, followed by cheers at the sky. From the drone footage, darkness drops on the lawn within seconds, lasts for 2 minutes, and then just as quickly, it is light. It seemed to last much longer on the ground. One of the hippie girls to our left, who had a septum piercing decorated with a moon pendant, said, "There's the stars. They're all coming out." Overhead, a helicopter circled. Between the sound of the rotor blades beating the air and the sight of the eclipse, I couldn't help but think of my brother Mark, dead and buried in the cemetery down the road for 7 years and 7 months. There's a different light under the eclipse. Feels fake. Look at just the light. It seems like we're in a helicopter searchlight, said Doug. As the darkness lifted and the temperature rose, I broke down and started crying. Deep, racking sobs pushed tears behind my foil glasses. It wasn't out of sadness. It was an experience common to the majesty of the moment. When I told people after that I had seen the eclipse, the first question for those who had also seen totality was, "Did you cry?"
That was bananas.
That was great.
It came to me after smoking a pipe next to the Navajo Bridge by Lee's Ferry. My living brother was negotiating with Navajo women for earrings for his wife, and Doug was shooting some B-roll. For a moment, I had a thought. This was a beautiful bridge to jump from. Dual steel spandrel arch bridges over the Colorado River, 466 feet below, that replaced the ferry system operated by John D. Lee, a distant relative of mine who wound up as a Mormon domestic terrorist, taking the fall for the Mountain Meadows Massacre. The eclipse's totality sharpened and changed the light with which I saw the people in my world, exposing each one's character in stark relief with crisp shadows. The choice was mine in how I reacted to those flaws. Like the eclipse itself, those exposed sharp edges, briefly revealed in their fullness, could blind me to the beauty of the rest, but only if I looked at them too hard, without the proper lenses, to save me from what I saw. I could embrace the circumstances of my life and the people in it for what they were in the moments we had. I could appreciate the beauty of the others in my life's orbit as each of us lives out our own once-in-a-lifetime totality, 2 minutes at a time.